The next question that I'd like to discuss in this session is the question of what kinds of people do a good job or are effective in another culture. What kinds of characteristics, what kinds of qualities does a person need to have in order to be an effective cross-cultural worker in another culture? If we know what those personal characteristics are, then we can help people to develop those and to train them and to show those kinds of characteristics. And so it's very important to find out what these qualities are. So I want to ask you, what do you think people need to have? What qualities do they need to have in order to do well in another culture? Let's think about that and make a list.
Such people have to be flexible and be easy to adapt.
Good. Okay. Another one? Larissa?
I think they need to be open-minded,
Mm-hmm.
And to some extent inquisitive, wanting to know more about a different culture and different people and different food and everything else. They need to actually love people and willing to get to know them.
Mm-hmm.
And well, maybe it's a technical term, but they need to be culturally sensitive. In other words, respectful of a new place.
Mm-hmm.
You know, having the mindset of someone who doesn't bring the Rome into a different culture,
Mm-hmm.
so to say.
Mhm.
That's
Okay.
basically.
Yeah.
Well, I think these people should be able and ready to change their mind.
Ready to change, like the square heads, to
Yeah.
change into more round. Mm-hmm.
And I think they should get acquainted with some cultural issues beforehand in order not to look silly or confused,
Mm-hmm.
to be prepared in some way.
To be prepared in some way, to think ahead. What are we going to be doing there? Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's an excellent list. Any others?
I would just agree with Olga. I heard one professor, anthropologist, said when missionary goes to another country, they always study Bible, think they need to study Bible.
Mm-hmm.
While this all time they have to study culture.
Mm-hmm.
Because, and we think studying Bible, it helps us in our culture, but really, I mean, it helps probably in a certain way, but said study culture is the most important at this moment when you go. So I would agree to preparation.
Yes.
It's really important. So as a tourist, I mean, people take you out, you don't have to connect with so much, but if to live in the culture, it has to be.
That's right. You have to study it. You have to, what they say, exegete the culture. You exegete the scripture and then you exegete the culture as well. So you understand what's going on. It's really, and is there another one, Larissa? Have you got another one?
If we talk about personal qualities, not, you know, the learning abilities of preparation, but the qualities that one should have to be successful in a different culture, I think communication skills are important. I mean, if you're a taciturn by nature, if you don't want to talk much, it's going to be really difficult to adapt.
Yeah. All of these are a very, very excellent list. In fact, it's very interesting because I want to share a study with you now that has been done, some research that has been done on this very question. What are the qualities that a person needs to do well, to be successful in another culture? Several years ago, there was a very interesting research study done by the Canadian government. And they wanted to know what were the qualities their technical assistants needed to have in other countries. They did a huge study. It was very big. They took 250 technical assistants in 6 different countries, and they looked at, take this, 100 qualities. So we've had, what, 5 or 6 flexible, open-minded, inquisitive, we love people, culturally sensitive, ready to change. They took 100 qualities that people had said would probably work or need to be considered, and they did research. And what they did is they asked the host country people, they asked the supervisors of these people, and they asked the people themselves a lot of questions about first of all, they had to find out who was the most successful, who was the most effective. And the issue of effectiveness was twofold. It was, do these people get along in the culture? And are they comfortable in the culture? Are they satisfied in the culture? And then the second one was, do they get the job done? Can they do what they need to do? And much of the job was transferring technical ability to the host country colleagues that they had. And so one of the sadder things they found in the research was that there was a very small group of these 250 that actually were that successful in the culture. But then they looked at all the characteristics. And you will not be surprised, because you had many of these characteristics yourself. They were listed, but let me just say, let's just read this. The Canadian International Development Agency study, it's now called the Canadian Foreign Service. It was an empirical study of Canadian technical assistance adapting and effectiveness in overseas assignment. And it was Daniel Hawes and Frank Keeley were the major researchers. They did a profile of effective technical assistance over advisors. And what was very interesting in this study was that interpersonal skills was the most important thing. Far and away, it was far more important than anything else that people had. And we'll go through those just now. But there were three major things. And then the second one was what they called a strong sense of self-identity. And then we'll talk about that in a little bit. And that was further down the road. And then the third one was realistic pre-departure expectations. Realistic pre-departure expectations, so what they were thinking about before they went overseas. And then finally, number 4 was technical ability. Technical ability. And that's sort of what most corporations in the past have thought about first, is can they do the job? And of course they need to be able to do the job. They have to have the technical ability. But if they don't have the first 3 things, they're not going to be successful. They're not going to be at all effective. And so let's just look at these, and I'll point them out to you here. First one is, the first whole section is what we call interpersonal skills. And the first one is flexibility. There you have it, flexibility. This is the ability to respond to ideas and points of view and to be open to what people believe and what they think, and to be able to enter into that and not just suddenly shut it all down, okay? So the flexibility is very important. The second one is respect. That is being responsive to others, which helps them feel valued. Let's stop there a minute. The issue is not showing respect, although that's important. The issue is showing the respect that makes them feel valued. So that means that the way in which you show respect has to be interpreted in their culture as respect. And so you have to show respect in ways that make them feel valued, which means you have to study the culture and you have to be inquisitive, etc. So respect was the second one. The third one was listening. You have to be a good listener, one who accurately perceives what people are trying to say and their needs and their feelings, to be able to read them and listen to them carefully. And if you don't understand, you have to check, inquire, and make sure that you do understand so that they feel like they're being heard. The next one is what we call relationship building. And that one is the whole idea of ability to maintain, build and maintain. So you don't just build a relationship and then you're off somewhere, but you maintain that relationship. You keep nurturing the relationship. You keep coming back to the relationship. And so you're trusting and friendly and cooperative. And then this one was interesting. It's called control. Calm and in full control when confronted by interpersonal conflict or stress. Some cultures tend to be very expressive and tend to be very animated when they get into a discussion and they argue and it's just part of the culture. And in America, we're used to debating. You know, if I can say to you, I disagree with you, Igor. I don't think that's right, and this is why. And we're very direct, you know, etc. And sometimes when we're upset with the way things are going, especially as Americans, we tend to get impatient and we lose a little bit of control and we get angry and we show our anger. And in Africa, you know what they think of us when we lose our cool like that? They think that we're childish and immature, can't even control their emotions, and they're just quite stunned that these people would be so immature, and yet we use it as a way to control a situation that we're not happy with, that we're frustrated with. And so control is really a critical piece of being able to have this interpersonal skill. And then the last one is sensitivity, and you talked about that as well. Understanding the local customs, the local greetings, the local ways of doing things, and the political and the cultural realities, and respecting those. So those were the main things. And again, remember that interpersonal skills was the most important one. The second one is what we called a strong sense of self-identity. Here we have three things. One is people who can take initiative. One of the first to act, to make suggestions, to make proposals. And the importance of this is so that you don't hide. You know, people can read you. You're open. You're free with your ideas. It doesn't mean that you run all over people and you tell them what to do. It's the whole idea, well, in a gracious way, you respect them and you say, how about we do this, but you can initiate and be open. The second one is confidence. Expresses and demonstrates self-confidence with regard to personal goals and judgments. You're not always afraid, you're not always pulling back, you're not introverted, you're confident, and you can't really initiate, can you, unless you feel some sense of self-confidence. And then the last one is frankness, and this one is a big surprise for the researchers, because they thought of those people that come from overseas and they're running at the mouth and they're saying everything they think, and it's not that. Frankness here is to be frank and open in dealing with others, being able to be authentic, being able to say who you are, being able to think aloud with people so that they're not surprised or they're not wondering, I wonder what they're thinking, I wonder how they're dealing with this situation. And so those are the three self-identity. And then the last one, the third one, was a little bit of a surprise. It was the whole issue of realistic pre-departure expectations. If you always have a few fears going overseas to another culture. And that's normal. You should be realistic, but also you should be positive about it. And so it's a mix of some caution, but some positive feelings as well. And it says here, has some concerns about living overseas, but still expects a rewarding experience. And what you expect will often be like self-fulfilling prophecy when you get there. You will see what you're looking for. And if you're going rather positive, I don't talk about being naive, I'm talking about being just positive and realistic about what to expect. And then finally, of course, you better know how to do your job. You better know. You better know if you're a missionary. You better know the scripture. You better know how to evangelize. You better know certain things. If you're a technical assistance person, you better know your field. If you're a videography, you better know videography. But that is important, but it's not the whole story. And so this research was really quite an eye-opener for the cross-cultural field when they realized that you can't just focus on the job. You have to find people that have these skills, and you can teach people to have better interpersonal skills before they go. And they can be prepared better before they, if they know these things, they can work on these things and work toward them. Now, some people would say to us, well, that's the corporate world, you know. And some years ago, my husband and I were talking to a Wycliffe missionary. These are the people that translate the scriptures in very remote tribal groups that have not got their language in writing. And so we were talking to this missionary, and we were told that Wycliffe did a similar study. It was a much smaller study, but they found that sometimes the Bible was translated and given to the people, and it went on the shelf, and nobody read it. And in other groups, the Bible was translated, and the people were willing and happy to read it, and they used the Bible and they read it. And the big question was, what's the difference? What's the difference? And so they looked at not 100 variables as the Canadians did, but they looked at about 16 or 17 different qualities of people. And they found some very interesting things. They compared where the Bible was read a great deal and where it was not read. And they found that where the translators were very technical, and they would, say, where do you put your tongue when you say that? And they're learning the language, and then they're working very hard, to get the right grammar and the right, transitions and that sort of thing. But they were very technical. And then often they would take what they learned from the group and they would go off and they would write and they would translate. Then there were other translators that were just as technically competent, but they were very friendly. They smiled a lot. They knew everybody's children's names. They stayed and sat around the fire at night and these sorts of things. These were the people who had the strong interpersonal skills. And those were the groups, most of the time, where the Bible was read and appreciated. And so, again, you see that the interpersonal skills is really the heart of being successful and being able to adjust overseas. When they're friendly, when they sat around, when they were inquisitive, when they asked questions, and when they followed the cultural norms and they were flexible, all these things, then they were much more successful, and trust was built, and then they were able to do the job that they were sent there for. So it's the personal relationships that make all the difference in the world. And it makes a difference of how effective we're all going to be, and we need to remember that when we move across cultures.
We strive to serve the contemporary Christian community, and with a variety of Christian educational and evangelistic resources. To see TVS resource base, please visit tvseminary.com.
Any ideas or thoughts that have come to your mind as we've been talking about this, about these qualities? I love the fact that you came up with most of the list before it was presented in the research.
Usually when a person came to another country, he immediately will be viewed as, he'll put by nationals by some level of the group of the people that they kind of assume.
I mean,
They-
their status.
yeah, the status or something. So is that depends much on which status you came. Okay, you can come like missionary came from, let's say, United States. They don't put the nice shoes. You gotta put the old shoes. You can go for that. But sometimes the status when you came with the nice shoes is much better. So it's a funny thing that in Russia in the beginning of Perestroika, when people come as Americans, was the best because everybody were hungry to see the other people. If you're trying to be so much change, that shows like less
Less acceptance.
yeah,
maybe?
because everybody wants to see the new, the Americans. If
Yeah.
you try to be really like Russian,
Yeah.
if you speak in English,
Yeah.
it's draw much more people. You're much more successful to spread the gospel to more people if you would try to speak in Russian, be just exactly like a Russian. I don't say we don't have to adjust, but in some times, like right now, it's almost opposite. You know, everybody's like, oh, maybe it's Americans do this and this, but there's a time when you just be yourself is becoming more successful than you try to change. And the missionaries and big speakers in stadiums, it's good to have some new people, everybody ready to listen to him. So is this kind of understand that sometimes that you don't change too much, it's really make some success in a certain time maybe of, I mean, there's any kind of study or understanding of this?
You're talking about change in the sense that the squareheads changing to be more like the culture. Is that what you're talking about, or is it
Try to
the
say
way in which you dress and the way in which you carry yourself? Sometimes you convey the status that you have. Is that essentially what you're saying?
Yeah, it's kind of,
And that can be misunderstood sometimes, too. You know, you reminded me of an experience my husband had. He was the principal of a Bible college in South Africa, and one Friday he came along and he found that the grass had not been cut. The students had not cut the grass, and he was worried because the church met there in the building on Sunday, and so he quickly took off his coat and went and got the lawnmower and cut the grass. And the students came to him the next Monday, and they said, "Oh, you shouldn't have cut the grass, because all the community saw you, the principal, cutting the grass." And, you know, so there was an issue of where he was not holding his status, but he should have, you know, because they said it makes you look like you have no control of the students, and they are out of control, and so you have to cut the grass. And it was just, you know, it was such a surprise to him, you know, that whole issue of you've got to know what your status is in a culture and use that. Yeah. Sasha.
I have a question. Are there any tests to check you how you prepare to travel, like how you're flexible, how you have all this, how you prepare in all these areas before you travel overseas, and how objective and helpful those tests could be?
That's a good question. The tests that people are doing in the U.S. right now are quite extensive. They're multiplying like rabbits. You know, everybody's got a different test. Some of them are much more valid than others, and it was nice of you to ask, because on my dissertation for my PhD, I actually created a test, and much of it was based on some of this research that was done. And I created a questionnaire that was for 45 questions, and it's online, and it measured a lot of the things that we were talking about here. Yeah, so there are tests that can be taken. Mostly, though, they have been researched in the U.S. On Americans, and they need to be researched elsewhere. Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah.
Could I ask a question?
Yes.
What if you're in a situation when a business wants to establish a branch in a different country, and there is some highly technical person who is able to do that, but he is not culturally adapted very well, and he won't get adapted well because that's the way he is. What do you prefer to do, or does a business prefer to do? Do they send a specialist in intercultural communication along with that professional to help him make decisions and behave and serve as a consultant, assistant in that area? Or do you pick someone else who does have cultural skills in addition to his technical skills?
What do you suggest?
Well, I don't really know. I think it's very difficult to find someone
is.
who would be technically very
is.
good and
It
at the
is.
same time very
It
sensitive
is.
culturally and easy to adapt.
It is.
And I think it's going to be a tough
Yeah.
situation when you have to choose between the two.
This is a
Because
big
the business
challenge.
wants to succeed, and if you want to
Absolutely.
succeed, you need to have some very good technical skills, right?
It is. It's a big challenge, and you hit the nail right on the head. And the fact that that person who's technically competent may be just so offensive in the culture. You know, I remember in World Relief we had an accountant who was also bicultural, and we would send her out to train the accountants in the different countries, and she was superb because she was bicultural and she was flexible and she understood and she was gentle. She wasn't harsh. But and that would be your best choice. And I think even if they're not quite as technically competent, if they have the interpersonal skills and the cultural sensitivities, I would prefer that. But the problem is often people who make these decisions don't realize how important the interpersonal skills are. And so they say, oh, well, he's technically competent, let's send him. And he may do more damage than good. Yeah, excellent question, good. Well, thank you very much. Yeah, yeah.
Now he who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food will also supply and increase your store of seed, and will enlarge the harvest of your righteousness. You will be enriched in every way, so that you can be generous on every occasion, and through us your generosity will result in thanksgiving to God. 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verses 10-11. How to give to TVS Ministry. You may give online at efca.org/givenow. In the description place, write Russia Distance Learning, account number 24109-0150. Or make checks out to EFCA. Write on the check memo line, Russian Distance Learning, account number 24109-0150. Mail to EFCA Donor Services, 901 East 78th Street, Minneapolis, Minnesota, 55420-1300. Or send your gift through PayPal for tvs.gift@gmail.com.